Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing part 208 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights. We tackling some of the wonderful mods people be making and use to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today, we've got a very interesting animal you saw in the thumbnail. I'm actually quite excited to get stuck into this one. It's a beautiful reconstruction of an extinct ape that I think everyone will kind of know. But we'll get back to it, of course, when we get to it. But we've also got a few other modern subspecies of other animals and things like that. So, a very interesting kind of big group of animales. So, we're going to get started with the exhibit animal done by Tosco DS, or Tuco DS, is probably the better way to pronounce it. Who has really made some cool little snails. So, this is the northern moon snail. So, let's see if we can find one in a slightly bit lighter. Have a look at these goofy goopers. I quite like them. So if you find one in a good light, there we are. Perfect. Little snail. How can you not love a snail? So this is the northern moon snail. So these guys are a species of large sea snail in the family Nacuridae. And they're rather uncommon intertidally, but they're more common subtidally. And the species, like all moon snail species, tend to voraciously feed on clams and also other snails, so they're very carnivorous snails. So, in terms of its description, the species has a very globular shaped shell, very much like a globe. And under the right conditions, can grow about 125 millimeters or about 12.5 centimeters or just under 5 inches in length. The operculum is large, air-shaped and outline and somewhat transparent. And on the beaches where the shell is of the species is washed up quite commonly, it will usually be found washed up along the drift line. So that's kind of where the beach meets the ocean kind of thing. In terms of its distribution, the distribution of Asperaheros, which is its scientific name, is within 51.5 degrees north to 33 degrees north, 76 degrees west to 65 degrees west. And this western Atlantic species, so this is found in the west of the Atlantic, around Canada, around the Labrador, St. Lawrence, Quebec, New Brunswick, and New Nova Scotia, while in America it can be found in Massachusetts, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, New Hampshire, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, and Maine, and is a sibling species on the Pacific coast of North America, Neveretta luzii, so it's a similar species. It lives on sand substrates and infrathical or citrolithial parts and estuaries, so kind of living in the substrate and things like that in there. And in terms of predation, empty shells of clams and snails, including other moon snails, display evidence of predation by a moon snail when they have a neat countersnuck hole kind of dug into the shell, actually. Because the powerful the foot of this gastropod uses it to plow under the sand in search for mollusks, and then upon finding one, it will drill a hole in the shell of that mollusk using its radula. That's a tongue with lots of little teeth that all snails have, but these guys have a carnivorous radula, so they're able to break into shells and things like that, and then release digestive enzymes into the shell and sucks up the somewhat pre-digested contents of the mollusk, because it's got a hard shell, so basically sucks up the pre-digested food or soft parts of the animal and just sucks it up. So very, very interesting way to feed for a very interesting little snail. So yeah, definitely a big fan of that. Tosco DS giving us always some very interesting animals. I'm always a big fan of that. So next up we've got Sky Polaris, who's actually given us quite a few mods today. So we're going to have a look at a couple of crocodilian mods they've given us. So we've got here, this one's quite cool, the Rio Apaporis Caiman. So this is a subspecies of the spectacled caiman. So really not that different, but it's got a cool story, so that's why it's worth kind of suggesting. So there's 4 different subspecies of the spectacled caiman, with the Rio Apaporis caiman was actually once thought to be extinct and was rediscovered later. It's an endemic to Colombia and possibly found in the Llanos in Venezuela. But its story is very interesting. So the Rio Apaporis caiman was believed to have been extinct by 1981, when the last known specimen actually died in a zoo. However, a specimen was actually captured by in an expedition by Colombian conservation biologist Sergio Ballagina Reina in 2018, and then later the subspecies was discovered again by Forrest Galante, who's become quite notorious for being a bit of a parachute scientist and all that stuff. Um, and yeah, very. I did like the show. The Extincted Live show was a pretty cool show, and I really wish they did a little bit more of that because he's a great presenter and all that. But yeah, bit of a parachute scientist in that regard. And was found for a show Extinct or Alive in 2019 and identified by DNA sampling. And Galante has advocated for the Rio Apaporis caiman to be a distinct species, while Belagiana reina maintains its official status as a subspecies. So yeah, kind of a self-explanatory there. There has been some arguments, as I mentioned, for it being it's a different species, but a lot of um, genetic stuff that I've read about. I've done a little bit of reading on this caiman because Forrest Galante, I was a big fan and used to do a bit of reading up on that and enjoyed the show. So yeah, I would definitely say it's definitely subspecies because its ecology for the most part is very similar, and it's really some only minor differences between this caiman and the other subspecies of a spectacle caiman. But a really really cool one. Another cool little. I like that we're getting a lot of these little subspecies from Sky Polaris, and you got to add a really cute baby for measure. So yeah, definitely a big fan. So that's the Rio Apaporis caiman. Next up, we got the false Gharial, which was also made. We've covered this one a couple times. This is Tommy Stomer. We've covered this one a couple times, but someone else, decided to make an attempt of it, so we'll have a little excuse to talk about it again. So the false Gharial, also known as the Tommy Stomer, the Malayan Gharial, or the Sunda Gharial. These guys are a species of freshwater gharial, or freshwater crocodilian in the family Gravalidae, native to Malaysia, Borneo, Sumatra, and Java, and is currently listed as endangered, with believed to be about 2,500 to 10,000 mature individuals left in the wild. So, in terms of its colours, this actually does fit not that well with the original colours. You can tell it's just a slightly modded caiman, not caiman, Gharial from the game. But I will say, with the big but, there are some other mods. I think Scott made one, or there's so many mods, I can't keep track of them all, but there are other false Gharial mods as well that are a little bit more accurately show the colours, but this is still a cool mod to talk about the species. So the false Gharial, they tend to be covered in reddish brown or black spots with cross bands, dark bands across the tail. The ventrals being white. I'm not going to talk too much about here, but they actually have one of the slimmest snouts of any living crocodilian, comparable to the slender snouted crocodile or the freshwater crocodile, but the only animal with a much more slender snout is the Gharial, the true Gharial. And they also do get quite big. 3 mature males kept in captivity measured between 3.6 to 3.9 meters, or 12 to 13 feet, and weighed between 190 to 210 kilograms, or 420 to 460 pounds as well, while the female being about 10 feet and about 93 kilograms. There's been talks about big males growing up to 5 meters long, 16 feet, and weighing 600 kilograms, and actually have the largest skull of any extinct crocodilian, because they have a great length of the slender snout, so they typically have the longest one as well. So that's quite interesting. So the scientific name Seligii honors the scientist Hermel Schlegel, I believe you say that. And it was originally described as Crocodilus, and then described in 1846 as a distinct genus of Tomistoma. And Tomistoma itself actually has quite a few different extinct species in it as well, though some evidence suggests it may be paraphyletic. But yeah, its snout broadens considerably towards the base and is actually more similar to true crocodilians, so those are Gharials, though the Gharials are their closest living relatives, so they're not that closely related. And there have been fossils of extinct Tomistoma species found pretty much across the Paleogene, Neogen, Quaternary of Taiwan, Uganda, Italy, Portugal, Egypt, and India. But nearly all of them are supposed to be distinct genera because of their older age, so they're very similar species at least. So we know, as I mentioned, they are related to modern Gharials. But Gharials were once a very diverse group of crocodilians. There were even marine ones like Pisco Garabalis. And there are other, and they were quite common and quite widespread across the world, as I mentioned, marine ones. So that's quite cool there. In terms of their distribution, they are native to, as I mentioned, Malaysia and the islands of Borneo and Sumatra, and are locally extinct in Singapore, Vietnam, and Thailand, but typically live in peat swamps and lowland forests. but prior to the 1950s, they could be found across the entire length of the Sumatran East. But due to agriculture and hunting and logging and farming and agriculture, they have is estimated there's less than 2,500 individuals as of 2010. So it's a little bit sad. In terms of their diets, there was actually very little known about their diets until recently. Details have slowly been revealed, and it was thought they had a diet of very small invertebrates, so only fish. But more recent evidence suggests they actually were a bit more generous than we let on, and they have been seen, despite the narrow snout, they've been eating a lot of large vertebrates as well. They've even been seen eating proboscis monkeys, long-tailed macaques, deer, water birds, and reptiles. And there's even an eyewitness account of a gharial going against the cow, which is quite interesting. At least to me. The false gharial may be considered a ecological equivalent to neotropical crocodilians, such as the Orinoco and American crocodiles. So that's kind of a good example there. In terms of reproduction, we'll have a look at the cute little babies while we talk about the reproduction. That's really cute little guys. So the Rio Apaporis, no, that's not the Rio Apaporis. The false gharial is a mound nester, very similar to most other crocodilians. Females lay small clutches of about 13 to 35 eggs per nest and appear to produce the largest eggs of living crocodilians. They attain sexual maturity to about 2.5 to 3 meters, or about 8 to 9 feet in length, which is large actually compared to other crocodilians. And courtships coincide with periods of rainfall from November to February and from April to June. And in terms of conflict with people, a 4-meter female false gharial actually killed and ate a fisherman in central Kalimantan, and the remains was actually found in the stomach of the gharial. And this was actually the first verified attack, or deadly attack from a gharial. It's the first time a false gharial actually killed and ate someone. However, by 2012, there's been these 2 more verified fatal attacks on humans by false gharials, and occurred, indicating there's perhaps an increase of human false gharial conflict because of the decline in the habitat and the quality of their habitat, but also, natural prey numbers going down, so they're getting more desperate, so starting to eat people. So that's probably the best way to describe it. In terms of its threats, as I mentioned, they are an endangered species. The false gharial is threatened by habitat loss in most of its range due to the draining of freshwater swamps and conversion for commercial plantations and for oil palms as well. They also hunted for its skin and meat, and its eggs are often harvested for human consumption. And population surveys carried out in the mid-2000s indicate the distribution of individuals is spotty and disconnected, which also shows a risk of genetic isolation. And some population units are in unprotected areas, do not bear viable breeding adults. So that's a little bit sad. So they are listed as Appendix 1, so they are endangered, and if you hold one, kill one and have anything relating to a false gharial, you probably get arrested without a permit. And steps have been taken to try and prevent their extinction in the wild, and there have been some populations rebounding in Indonesia, yet with the slight recovery, more rational fears of attacks have surfaced among local people. So that's a bit of a worry, but, hopefully we can come up with some good conflict resolution there. People live with crocodilians all over the world, so hopefully we can make it work. Yeah, really, really cool. We'll have a look at the female for a minute. Really, really cool one there. Nice false gharial. Cool to talk about them. Alright, so next up we've got Great Cakes mods. So these 2 were done by Sky Polaris. We've got next Great Cakes mods, who has made some awesome mods even today. This is a really awesome one. This is the Waved Albatross, also known as the Galapagos Albatross. So these are one of these 3 species in the family Dimetrodiridae, which is the albatross, that occurs in the tropics. And when they forage, they follow a straight path from a single site off the coast of Peru and about 1,000 kilometers or 620 miles to the east. But during non-breeding seasons, they reside primarily on the Ecuadorian and Peruvian coasts. So they belong in the family Diamedelidae in the order Procellariformes, along with shearwaters, fulmars, storm petrels, and diving petrels. They share certain identifying features with them. They have a nasal passage that attaches to the upper bill, called naricorns. Although the nostrils of the albatross are on the sides of its bill. And the bills of these guys are unique as they split into 7 to 9 horny plates. Also, they produce a stomach oil made of wax esters and triglycerides that are stored in the proventriculus, and this is used against predators and is an energy-rich food source for chicks and for the adults during long flights. They also have a salt gland that is situated above the nasal passage that helps desalinate their body due to the high amount of ocean water that they live in, of course. So, in terms of how they got their name because of the wave-like pattern of the feathers on the adults. You can kind of see the waves there, so it's where they kind of get their name. Really, really beautiful birds. In terms of their size, they are medium-sized albatross, measuring about 80 to 90 centimeters, or about 31 to 35 inches in length, and a wingspan of 220 to 250 centimeters, or 7'2" to 8'2". And they range between 2.7 and 4 kilograms, about 6 to 8 pounds, with males, average, larger than, heavier than females. They have they are distinctive for their yellowish cream neck and head, which contrasts their mostly brownish bodies. Even more distinct is that very long yellow bill that they got going on, which looks disproportionately large to their relatively small heads and slender necks, so they look a little bit, funky, but, gives them that distinct look. They also have chestnut brown upper parts and underparts, except for the breast, with a fine barring as well, with a little coarser on the rump. They have brown upper wings, back and tail, along with whitish breast and underwings. So you can see that whitish going on there. Auxiliaries are brown, and finally they have a bluish feet. Juveniles are similar to the adults, except for more white on their heads. And chicks have brown, fluffy feathers, and the lifespan of this species is quite long, about 45 to 50 years. So we'll have a look at the babies when we talk about their reproduction. You can see there's one there, but we'll have a look at you over there. No, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to have a look at you, because why not? In terms of their range, they primarily breed on the Hispaniola Island in the Galapagos archipelago. However, there are sighting of non-breeding and therefore possibly small numbers, about 10 to 20 of these breeders on Genovesa Island and Isla de la Plata. During non-breeding seasons, they will shift to the east and southeast of the continental shelf, from the coast of Peru to Ecuador, and sometimes they are actually seen in Colombia, so that's quite cool. In terms of feeding, the primary food source for the waved albatross is fish, squid, and crustaceans, as well as smaller birds. They have been observed to scavenge other food sources, including regurgitated food from other birds, and when foraging, they will find places in the ocean where prey is near the surface, as this is the most effective way for them to get their food. And the waved albatross will forage about 10 to 100 kilometers, or 6.2 to 62 miles, away from the places where their chicks are nesting to get food for them. In terms of their nests and breeding, let's have a look at the babies while we talk about the breeding. So there's the two little babies here. You can see very, very fluffy little guys. Their nests are built in areas of lava with boulders and sparse vegetation. The courtship of the waved albatross is very elusive in this particular site. It includes rapid bill circling and bowing, beak clacking, and an upraised bill to make a woohoo sound. And once they're done doing their courtship, they will make eggs, and the eggs are laid between April and June and incubated for 2 months. When the eggs hatch, the chicks will stay together in small nurseries where the parents will go out to sea for hunting. When the parents return, they may feed the chick up to 2 kilograms of oil, and so that's quite a bit. And the young reach adult size by December and leave the colony by January. The partners remain mates until one of the partner dies, so they do mate for life for the most part, so that's quite cute. In terms of flight, they are quite spectacular flyers, perhaps even the most famous, and that is partly because albatrosses in general, they can fly for hours without stalling, and they do this by dynamic soaring. So the wing speed near the surface of the sea is much lower than about 50 feet in the air, or about 15 meters. They use this to its advantage by gliding at speed in the wind, and as the waved albatross glides higher, it loses most of its ground speed because of its gliding into a wind of higher speed. However, its airspeed does not fall, enabling it to glide continuously. Waved albatrosses do have difficulty in landing because of their high stalling speeds, and taking off because of their weight and wingspan. Though to make it easier, sometimes they will take off on cliffs that are somewhat inland rather than beside the coasts. So that's kind of the trade-off. They're not quite good at landing and taking off. It's a bit of a worry. But that's all good. In terms of their conservation, the populations of waved albatross now are protected by national park personnel. They are quite well protected. There's believed in the Galapagos Islands about 34,000 breeding pairs with a 19% decline, so it's a little bit of a worry. But there's other smaller pairs as well. They are managed by national park personnel, as the island that it lives on is characterized as a World Heritage Site, but its limited range bycatch by longline fishing, disturbances via tourism, disease, and the effects of illegal fishing and nearby watering puts them in considerable jeopardy. And long line fishing in particular seems to have a fair impact on the species, as they were upgraded from near threatened to vulnerable, and now they're actually considered critically endangered, so that's quite interesting. Despite there are some 34,700 adults as 2001, the numbers have apparently started to decline at an unknown rate more recently, probably due to longline fishing, which upsets the sex ratio, with males being killed more frequently than females. And its current situation actually makes this population highly vulnerable to a catastrophic collapse and extinction. It's actually uplisted as to critically endangered in 2007. So the population of 34,700 was based on 2001 estimates, but however, in the 1970 and 71s suggest they were between 24,000 and 31 to 36,000. And the species occurs in quite a large range, about 1,750,000 square kilometres, and a breeding range of about 9 kilometres. So, yeah, if anything happens to that, that's a bit of a worry. But, yeah, really, really cool species. Definitely a big fan. Another great cakes mod, killing it with those mods. So next up, we've got another really cool species by Sky Polaris. We've got a couple more Sky Polaris mods. I think this is the perfect time to cover it, and we've got here the Sri Lankan elephant. So I love elephants, and this is the Sri Lankan elephant. So the Sri Lankan elephant is a subspecies of the Asian elephant, Elephas maximus maximus. So this is the dominant subspecies. We'll have a look at the female while we let him do his thing. Really beautiful. Let's see if I can get that there. Probably a little bit. Yeah, there's changes there. Anyway, is native to Sri Lanka and is one of the 3 recognized subspecies of the Asian elephant. It is the type subspecies of the Asian elephant and was first described by Carl Linnaeus under the binomial Elephas maximus in 1758. Now, the Sri Lankan elephant population is now largely restricted to the dry zones in the north, east, and southeast of Sri Lanka. These elephants being present on a few national parks, but also do live outside those protected areas. It is estimated that Sri Lanka has the highest density of elephants in Asia, and human-elephant conflict is actually increasing due to the conversion of elephant habitat to settlements and permanent cultivation. So that obviously causes a lot of conflicts with the area's big herbivores. So in terms of how they look, they are considered the largest subspecies of elephant, Asian elephant, about 2.5 to 3 meters tall, or between 6'7" to 11'6" at the shoulder, and weigh between 2,000 to 5,500 kilograms, or about 4,400 to 12,100 pounds. So quite big. They have 19 pairs of ribs, and their skin color is darker than that of the Indian elephant or the Sumatran elephant. And they also have larger, with more distinct patches of depigmentation on the ears, face, trunk, and belly. They also tend to be females, usually smaller, and 90% of tussless males are called makina. And only 7% of males actually bear tusks, so that's quite interesting. We'll have a look at the other one. So only 7% of males actually bear tusks, and they grow up to 1.8 meters in length and weigh about 35 kilograms. With some actually having really long tusks. And I think there was an update to this mod that had the longer tusks, but I didn't want to put it in before the video. But that's fine. It's pretty minor. In terms of how it's defined, the Sri Lankan subspecies designation is considered weakly supported by analysis by allosome loci, but not by mitochondrial DNA. So I'm not sure the validity of the subspecies, because really other research suggests that there's kind of a hodgepodge of many different elephant populations, because people were importing elephants as well. But also, this Sri Lanka was only separated from India about 500 or so years ago. So it's easily that these guys could have moved into India and bred with Indian elephants. So I doubt the validity of kind of in that regard, the genetic differences. Still really, really cool though. I'm not a taxonomist, so that's not me to decide. It's probably someone with a lot more research considering that. But anyway, in terms of their distribution and habitat, the Sri Lankan elephant is restricted mostly to the lowlands of the dry zones, and where they're still fairly widespread in the north, southeast, northwestern, north central, and southeastern Sri Lanka. So typically around that side. But in the historic range, they were widely distributed across Sri Lanka, so they were found everywhere. You could find them as well as the top mountains to there. But during the colonial periods of 1505 to 1948, the wet zones of Sri Lanka were converted to commercially used fields and became heavily settled. And until about 1830, elephants was actually considered so plentiful that the destruction was encouraged by the government, and if you killed them, you got rewarded. But at the first half of the 19th century, the forests of the mountain zone were also cleared for large-scale planting of coffee and then tea, and the elephants' populations there were extirpated. During the British rule, many bull elephants were also killed by trophy hunters and things like that. But even today, they are still distributed over much of the island, but there is some issues there. But there are believed to be the size of the elephant population today is estimated to be about 7,500 as of 2019. In terms of their ecology, they're really not too different to normal Asian elephants. They are mega herbivores and will eat about 150 kilograms of food per day, or about 330 pounds. They feed on a wide variety of foods. About 116 plant species is known. A lot of trees and grasses, so very generous in that regard. They also, juvenile elephants tend to eat grass a lot more. Forests, food resources are quite abundant in regenerating forests, but in low density mature forests. So actually, traditional slash and burn agriculture actually creates optimum habitat for elephants, which is quite interesting. And in terms of their social groups, they tend to live in small, loosely associated social groups without a hierarchical, tier. Actually, quite similar to African bush elephants, where by some locations, 100 individuals will come together during the dry season, and they make all sorts of different sounds and smells and low frequency calls to communicate with each other, just like other populations of elephants. We'll have a look at the cute little babies, because I've seen them running around, and I know we always love cute little babies, and I gotta say they're quite adorbs. Very, very cool. Anyway, in terms of threats, during the Sri Lankan Civil War, a lot of elephants were killed by landmines. Poaching for ivory has not been a major threat for these guys, since the tuskers are actually quite rare. But there's still some trade going on, but it's not really that impacting them. But most of the issues is mainly competition with, or raiding people with their crops and things like that. So between 1999 and 2006, it was estimated 100 wild elephants were killed every year due to protecting crops and houses. And nearly 80 elephants were killed in northwestern Sri Lanka, 50 in the east, and totaling about 160 elephant deaths in 2006 alone. So that's considered that high mortality as people killing them and retaliating for them to come and steal their crops and protecting their homes. That's a bit of a worry. But there is some evidence or some efforts to help them, so they are considered protected population, and they aim to conserve them and create corridors so they can move across the island with no worries. And there are places such as the Elephant Orphanage and the Undawele Elephant Transit Centre that rehabilitates these guys and helps young elephants and things like that. But they are actually considered quite important culturally to these areas. So the Sri Lankan heredity actually had them for like 2,000 years, and they remain so through British colonial rule. The coat of arms for the Ceylon government was actually included an elephant and was in Sri Lankan elephant. They've been used a lot of Buddhist temples. They've also been domesticated and used for work, to pull logs, but also for war. So, people, using them to kill other people as well. And Sri Lanka was actually considered kind of a mecca for that, and a lot of elephants were actually exported out of Sri Lanka and out into like India and Middle East and places like that to use for things used to exported them during the Portuguese and Dutch colonial era. And the British actually did not use them to export elephants, but instead they used domestic elephants or the tamed elephants to hunt wild elephants, which is quite interesting as well. and they're still used, to logging on terrain that's a bit too uncertain for diggers and trucks to get in. They use the elephants because they are much better at steeper terrain and things like that. But there have been legal reforms pertaining to captive elephants, so there's some changes in that though. But yeah, it's a good thing because elephant welfare should be priority. But yeah, really, really cool, really beautiful animals. Definitely a big fan of this cool mod. Definitely a cool one. But yeah, really, really awesome. Definitely a big fan. Sri Lankan Elephant, done by Sky Polaris. And next we got another one done by Sky Polaris. We're going back in time for this one. This is the... let's have a look at you, because you're the one that's the big, impressive male. So this is the Ngandong tiger, also known as Panthera tigris ciliaris, also known as I mentioned the Ngandong tiger. So these guys are an extinct species or subspecies of tiger, of the modern tigers, so the typical tigers, and it lived during the Sundaland region during the Pleistocene, so not too long ago. So first fossils of this guy were actually primarily found in the village of Ngandong, hence its common name, and only 7 fossils are known, which makes this actually a pretty difficult one to study. But what kind of makes it interesting is that it's quite big. So some specimens suggest it would have been about the size of a modern tiger. However, given the size of some other remains, it would have been larger than a modern tiger. So a large male could have weighed about 400 kilograms, or about 880 pounds, which would be the case. It'd be larger than heavier than any extant tiger subspecies, including, the Siberian tiger, which is considered the largest. And actually also making it among one of the largest felids in the world, which is interesting as well, that have ever lived. But in 2016, they were estimated to be about, on average, 184 kilograms, with the largest specimens being 298. So about kind of similar size, not maybe a little bit bigger on average than most tigers. So nothing too drastically amazing, but definitely a little bit bigger in that regard. So nothing too drastic. Not this 400 kilo thing, but yeah. In terms of its paleoecology, in addition to those remains, many other fossil sites have been found from that time, including the Proboscidean Stegodon Trigoncephalus, and also Elephas hydroniscus, which is an extinct species of Asian elephant related to the modern Asian elephant. Also the bovids Barbarus Paleocubana and Bos Paleosodindes, which are kind of ancient, species of antelope and cows. The extinct Prisodactyls, Tapirus indicus and Rhinoceros sonaris, so kind of, tapirs and Javan rhinos. And also a great variety of deer species. And also Homo erectus silenius is also found in this area. So specimens of Homo erectus, which is a relative of modern humans, live there too. So yeah, really, really cool. Actually, we'll have a look at the Zoopedia and actually compare, so we can have the Siberian tiger's average. So I don't actually know off the top of my head. So yeah, 3.14 1. So look up Siberian. Yeah, they kind of use a different one. So, but yeah, we'll have a look at tiger. So that's 217 kilos for Siberian tiger. For the male, 310. So yeah, a little bit bigger, but this is obviously the game version. But yeah, 298 kilograms. So that's probably about the same as the Siberian tiger in the real life. Yeah, really, really cool. Anyway, so last mod I'll get to talk about. This one I'm really actually excited to talk about. They did a really great job with this one. Great Cakes mod has really outdone themselves and made a Gigantopithecus blackie. So let's have a look at this Gigantopithecus. So I'm quite excited to talk about this one. I love Gigantopithecus. It's a really cool animal, and a lot of people just reconstruct it as a giant orangutan. So it's really awesome that we get a kind of cool reconstructive of it in Planet Zoo, but also something that's genuinely distinct, because it wasn't just a giant orangutan. It was a very different animal. For even the little that we know about it, we know a lot about it, which sounds a bit counterintuitive. And there's also a lot of variation with this mod, so we'll talk about that soon. But we're going to talk first about what Gigantopithecus is. So Gigantopithecus is an extinct genus of ape that is now known from China and lived from about 2 million to about 300 to 200,000 years ago. So most of the Pleistocene. and is now represented by one species, Gigantopithecus blackie. There's been possible identifications being made in Thailand, Vietnam, and Indonesia, but a lot of them may be just misidentified remains of the Chinese orangutan. And the first remains of Gigantopithecus, which is two third molar teeth, were identified in a drugstore by anthropologist Ralph von Korswald in 1935 and described the ape and subsequently described it. And in 1956, the first mandible and actually more than 1,000 teeth were found in Luqing, and numerous more remains have been found at 16 sites. And only teeth and 4 mandibles are actually known, and other skeletal elements were actually believed to be likely consumed by porcupines before they could fossilize. And there actually was a lot of arguments that this could actually been an early, hominin, so a member of the human line, so this could have been a giant person. But now it's considered to be more closely related to modern orangutans in the subfamily Pagonidae. So in terms of discovery, I'm kind of mentioned that discovery there, which is really, really interesting. And they've been found in quite a few places around the way. They're actually considered to be the 1955. There was a survey that was finding the original locality and found the teeth among kind of dragon bones, which is quite interesting as well. But in terms of classification, in 1935, this was considered to be a close relative of Silvopithecus from India. And then also in 1939, South African paleontologist Robert Broom suggested it was closely aligned to Australopithecus and the last common ancestor of humans and other apes. And then even in 1946, Jewish-German anthropologist Franz Weidenreich described it as a human ancestor, Gigantopithecus. And then it was also a bit of debate whether it was stated with teeth are more similar to those of modern humans and Human erectus compared to these guys, and was actually considered envisioned a lineage from Gigantopithecus, the Javanate Meganthropus, which was then considered a human ancestor. But obviously that didn't pan out to be the way. And at the time as well, it's important to remember that a lot of people were thinking humans came out of Asia and not out of Africa. So that's kind of the way that we're thinking there. But now they are classified as Pagonidae, so they're closely related to Silvopithecus and Indopithecus, which would make their closest living relatives the orangutan. But however, there are a few similar traits or synapomorphies linking Gigantopithecus to orangutans due to fragmentary remains, and the main morphological argument being close affinity to Silvopithecus, which has been established for Pagonian based on skull features. But also as well in 2019, so there is even some recent research on Gigantopithecus. Peptide sequencing of dentine enamel proteins indicate that Gigantopithecus was indeed closely aligned to orangutans, and assuming the current mutation rate in orangutans would remain consistent, shared a common ancestor about 12 to 10 million years ago in the middle to late Miocene. And the last common ancestor would have been part of the Great Miocene radiation of apes. And the same study also calculated the African great apes and the pongans, or the orangutans and their relatives, would have split between 26 to 17 million years ago, so right in the beginning of the Miocene. One of the big things about Gigantopithecus is, of course, in the name, it is a giant. So let's have a look at another color there. There's lots of different colors. Is its size. So total size estimates have been really all over the place because really it's only known from teeth and mandibles. But there's actually a lot you can tell about mammals and their teeth. So we do actually know quite a lot about Gigantopithecus, even though it's really only known from teeth and some jawbones. But total size has been really hard to estimate, and as any kind of estimate you put on them is very speculative. As molar size and total body weight does not always correlate. But still, even with that, it's still thought that Gigantopithecus would have been the biggest primate ever recorded. With some estimates, the earliest estimates put it about twice the size of a male gorilla. Some put them at about 3'7" or about 12 feet tall. But most recent ones have typically put them about a standing height of about 230 centimeters, or about 8 feet tall. Still very, very huge, but much bigger than a gorilla. Still, not this 300, 400 kilogram animal, but still much larger than a modern gorilla. The average maximum length of the upper canines for presumed males and females are about 21.1 millimeters and about 15 millimeters, respectively. So males typically had much larger mandible length as well, and the mandibles actually have different sizes as well. So that's really interesting because that tells us that there was potentially sexual dimorphism in this species, with males being larger than females. And this type of sexual dimorphism is also really tells us a lot about their behavior, because this sexual dimorphism is really not seen into this kind of degree, with the males being much larger than the females. Is really only seen in gorillas. Only surpassed by gorillas, so they may have had an ecology more like a gorilla in that regard, which is quite cool. Like other apes, they did have a dental formula similar to ours, with two incisors, one canine, two premolars, and three molars at each half of both jaws. Their canines, though, were not very big, and their incisors were also reduced, and they would have had a bit of an underbite too. And the tooth enamel on the molar is actually the absolute measure, the thickest known of any ape, at about 2.5 to 2.9 millimeters. So this has actually attracted comparisons to extinct Paranthropus hominins, with extremely large molars and thick enamel for their size. However, in relation to tooth size, it would have overlapped with lots of other living and extinct apes. And like orangutans and potentially all begonids, though unlike African apes, they would have had large and flat grinding surfaces on their teeth as well. But yes, as I mentioned, only known from teeth, but we know a lot about their diet too. So Gigantopithecus is considered to have been a herbivore, very similar to modern gorillas and orangutans. Well, let me look at you up there, because I think that'd be cool to look at you. And we get to look at a female one. I wonder if they'll brachiate, because they are based on orangutans, but I doubt a real-life Gigantopithecus would be able to brachiate, simply just because of their size. But that's all right. We'll let them carry on, do their thing. We'll have a look at the other male, the one that looks like a Saki monkey. Let's look at you. Very, very cool. As I mentioned, it would have been a herbivore. Carbon-13 isotope analysis suggests they ate a lot of C3 plants, such as fruits, leaves, and other forest plants. And the robust mandibles suggest they would have been able to take quite a high strain of plants as well. They were high strains in chewing tough and hard foods. However, the same mandibular anatomy is typically seen in modern apes that eat soft leaves or seeds, and they have markedly lower rate of pitting, caused by eating small hard objects than orangutans. Suggesting that similar seen in chimpanzees, they would have had seen to have a similarly kind of more generalist diet. The molar-like premolars, the large molars, and long-rooted cheeked teeth could point to chewing, crushing, and grinding bulky materials. Thick enamel would suggest a diet of abrasive, as mentioned, abrasive items, such as dirt particles or food that sent into the ground, like bamboo shoots. But similar oxygen isotope on analysis suggests that Gigantopithecus would have eaten a lot of low-lying parts, such as stems, roots, grasses, than orangutans, which makes sense. It's a much heavier animal, would have been on the ground a lot more than an orangutan. Dental calculus indicates we'll be eating a lot of tubers, but did not appear to eat commonplace savanna grass or C4 plants. So these guys, pedoliths, would have also like figs, mulberries, banyan trees, and things like that. Would have been a significant part of the diet for at least this population of Gigantopithecus found in that cave, where they found a lot of those pedoliths. The 4,000 to 320,000 Middle Pleistocene teeth appear in cave show some differences from the early Pleistocene ones, as it indicate that these Gigantopithecus may have been more specialized for adapting to a changing environment. They would have probably been eating more flat. Their teeth were more flat, so they would have been eating different things as well. And what's really interesting as well, we'll have a look at a female now. You got to have a look at a female, because you can tell a little bit different there. In terms of its dental anatomy, based on hoofed animal remains in the site as well, they thought it was a cave-dwelling predator, but obviously that's not true at all. In 1975, American anthropologist Tim D. White drew similarities to the jaws and dentition of Gigantopithecus and that of the giant panda, which suggests that they may have had been the same niche and would have eaten a lot of bamboo. This garnered support from some researchers, but thicker enamel and Hypsodonty and Gigantopithecus could also suggest different functionality for these teeth. What's really cool as well, growth. So their permanent third molar were based on the approximate 600, 800 days for the enamel on the cusp to form, would have taken 4 years to form, and would have actually been in the same range of humans and chimpanzees as well. So they seem to have grown very similar to modern chimps and things like that. And I remember reading a study that suggests that Gigantopithecus would have been pregnant for like 2 years, very similar to elephants and things like that, but I'm not sure how much that holds up now. In terms of pathology, they also have a high cavity rate in their teeth at about 11%, which suggests they could have been eating a lot of fruit in their diet, which, sugar, it's what the dentists warn you about. Lots of sugar in your diet causes your teeth to decay and all that stuff. Of course, let's have a look at this one here, because this is the King Kong variant, but we'll talk about that. Which is interesting as well. So they tend to lose teeth a lot, and a lot of their teeth had grooves and things. Suggesting they had a very, diet that would have been, very hard on their teeth. But also society. So the high level of sexual dimorphism in this species could also indicate a lot of relatively intense male-to-male competition. Though considering the upper canines only protected slightly from the cheek teeth, canine displays were probably not very important in these behavior, unlike modern non-human apes. So it probably would have been more similar in that regard to something like gorillas. They would probably stand up and beat their chests. That's probably how it would have been, because, they're such big animals with not large canines, try to scare each other off. A lot of analogues to gorillas, because they would have actually had a lot of similar in terms of their ecology. In terms of its paleo ecology, these guys would have been generally found in subtropical evergreen broadleaf forests, except in Henan, where it's actually found in tropical rainforests. Carbon and oxygen isotopes of the enamel suggest that these guys would have lived in dense, humid, closed canopy forests, which would have been in evergreen forests and mixed deciduous and evergreen forests full of ferns and birch and oak and things like that. The Gigantopithecus fauna, which is actually considered one of the most important mammalian fauna groups of the early Pleistocene, includes subtropical and tropical forest species, and is put into 3 stages ranging from about 2.6 to 1.8 million years ago, 1.8 to 1.2 million years ago, and 1.2 to 0.8 million years ago, 800,000 years ago. So the early stage is more like ancient neogenes, so they've got the Gophotheres, Proboscideans, things like Cynomastodon, also Calicotheres like Hesperotherium, the Seward Hippopotamodon, Tergula Obcaribe, and deer as well. The middle stage has ancestors of the panda, Elaproda or Mushangiensis, the dhole, and the tapirs, an extinct species of tapir. In the late stage has another extinct species of panda and stegodonts, which are another species of elephant, stegodon itself. But other animals that are quite common are orangutans, macaques, extinct pigs such as Sus jiangsu and Sus pei, muntjacs, species of deer, gar, which is a cow, the bovid Megalovis, and more rarely, they actually has a saber-toothed cat, Meganterion, which is found there. And in 2019, actually, Russell Chikonin actually hypothesized an undescribed chimp-size ape that he identified from a few teeth that lived with Gigantopithecus, and then they were identified as a closely related Meganthropus, which is quite interesting as well. So Meganthropus may have actually lived with them as well, even though it's kind of, a Longgenong cave may have actually kind of represented a transitional zone between the Paleoarctic and Oriental zones, as you find these typical more forest fauna that Gigantopithecus would have lived with. You also find more boreal or more northerly species such as hedgehogs, hyenas, horses, and bovids, and pikas. That's quite cool as well. But in terms of their extinction, so we don't know what really drove them to extinction, but their fossil sites range from quite a bit. But the youngest definite Gigantopithecus is about 215,000 years ago, with 2 possible teeth potentially coming from the late Pleistocene, but they were found to be Chinese orangutan. So the extinction of Gigantopithecus is found to correlate with the cooling trends by intensing seasonality and monsoonal strength in the region, which could have led the encroachment of their forest homes by grasslands. And because their teeth dating showed evidence of dietary shifts and chronic nutritional stress, they may have had issues adapting to these habitats compared to other great apes such as the Homos, Homo, erectus, and potentially at that time, Denisovans and things like that. But also other species of extinct orangutans. And similarly, as I mentioned, they only have been seen eating C3 plants, so only trees and stuff, not C4 plants like savanna plants. They wouldn't have been eating there, so that's probably why they went extinct. But human activity in southern China has been known as early as 800,000 years ago, but it does not become prevalent until after the extinction of Gigantopithecus. So it potentially could have been competing with ancient humans, could have been preyed upon, by Homo erectus and things like that. But we don't know about that. And some people they argue that they're not even extinct, as we kind of talk about, giants like Bigfoot and the Yeti, all giant apes that lived in North America, which we have no evidence of apes other than humans living in North America. But that has taken off with cryptozoology saying, oh my god, we do have a giant ape in the fossil record, it's Gigantopithecus. So that's what Bigfoot or Yeti is, which obviously is not enough evidence to justify it, but cryptozoologists love to run with these things. And that's kind of the best way to describe them. But yeah, really, really cool mod. I have to say, I love this mod so much. One of my pet peeves is everyone kind of does Gigantopithecus as just a giant orangutan. And, as I mentioned, they would have had very different lives to orangutans because they were much bigger. They probably were more similar ecologically to gorillas, of course, because of their large size and living on the ground. And then we also mentioned as well sexual dimorphism. So they were likely more gorilla-like in a lot of ways, but as it also more closely related to orangutans. But what's really cool about this mod, you kind of get 3 different versions. So this kind of version's kind of the I don't know what you call them. There's the King Kong. So this is the King Kong one, which I actually quite like. The King Kong one is the one here that's just basically just black, which is probably the more realistic one, to be honest. But I really love how they did the fur as well. Probably the more realistic version, just a big black ape like that. More King Kong. We've also got here, this one looks like a gorilla or an orangutan had a kid with a saki monkey, and the uncle was a mandrill. You can kind of see that little bit of light colouring around their face there, which fits quite well with these guys. And I also love they got some of these sexual dimorphism there, like orangutans. So you can see got that big, those big pouches and the big sack under their heads, and you can see the females don't quite have that. So obviously the male and female versions of them, so that's kind of the mandrill one, the funky mandrill I'll call it. I know they have official names, but I haven't bothered with them yet. And then you have kind of the orangutan. So this is something that's kind of more typical of a Australopithecus reconstruction. So you can find it. There he is. So this one here is kind of the same of that one, but it's got that orange color, more similar to a typical orangutan reconstruction. And I got to say, I like that we got the variety, but my personal favorite, I'd have to say, is the just the dark black one. But this one's a close second. I like kind of the reddish color on there, and it's enough to recognize, it looks like an orangutan, but it's definitely a different animal altogether. And, shows that they put a little bit more effort into it rather than just making a little orangutan, a giant orangutan that walks around on the ground. And I'm definitely a big fan, and especially these cute little babies. How can you not love these guys? And I am testing to see if they brachiate. I haven't seen them brachiate yet. I guess Great Cakes may have just programmed them to not brachiate because they're a bit too big. But really, really cool to see the different varieties and things like that. Definitely a big, big fan. So yeah, I think that's about it for today. So I'll thank you, everyone. I'll thank, Great Cakes Mods. You did a really great job with the Gigantopithecus and the Albatross. Sky Polaris, you've been dominating the scene at the moment. You've got lots of different species, like the subspecies, like the Sri Lankan elephant and the Ngandong tiger and all them. But also Tosco DS, you've got to, throw in that moon snail in there. So yeah, really, really awesome mod. So I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to get the little bell icon to get notified below anything. So if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.